Is our last award, so if you have more dessert to eat, if there's extras on the table, feel free to eat those. So it is every year we do this Torch Award, and unfortunately, again this year, we're doing it posthumously. And I'd like to bring up Bob Nemec, who's going to help me with this award, so if he could please come up. The Torch Award is here. I should. I told him I'd make it easy, but I don't know how easy this is. So I'm gonna let Bob continue with this, but I just want to say this award is going to a very dear friend of ours and a very dear friend of APSE's, Ron Rucker. Ron was actually the board president who hired me, so he's very near and dear to my heart, and I know he's always looking down on me, telling me what not to do and what to do. So I'm going to let Bob Nemec continue on with the tribute to Ron Rucker.
Thanks, Laura. Ron Rucker was my best friend. He was a guy that saw something in me that inspired him to convince me to change careers and enter this field. I'm proud to say I'm not the only one whose career and life Ron changed. In 1974, Ron literally walked off of a ladder while installing a smoke detector and right into a job at Hillcroft Center in Muncie, Indiana. It says on the thing, Allentown, PA, and Ron's an Indiana boy, okay, so just let you know. Ron began his career over at Hillcroft by molding a group of actors with disabilities into a touring theater company. Using improvisational techniques that Ron had learned at Ball State University, he helped this group of actors tell their stories about what it meant to them to have a disability. They told of their hopes and their dreams, and their hopes and dreams to live on their own and maybe get married. But to a person, they spoke about wanting to have a job, a real job that paid good money. And this was back in 1975, 1976. Community employment outlook for folks with disabilities was bleak at best, if non-existent. Ron helped the actors tell their stories in their own words and shaped the content into a 30-minute film entitled Free to Be You and Me. He was able to secure funding from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Indiana Arts Commission to have the film printed and distributed. We don't know where it is now, but I really sure wish I could see it again. It was during that time that our paths first crossed, as Ron enlisted my skills as the technical director of the Muncie Civic Theater to assist with some of the production aspects. He also introduced me to Raymond, one of the actors. Raymond became my right-hand man during the production duties, helping me to move scenery pieces. This was just a temporary stop for Raymond because what he really wanted to be was a rock star. And he would tell you that anytime he had the opportunity. But it was Raymond's desire to live an ordinary life and have what everyone else had that made a huge impression on me. The Human Tree Players, as they were called, was but one of the innovative ideas that Ron introduced to our field or to human services. Ron had a way of putting things into practice, whether it was his original idea or something that he ran across that inspired him. But he was always trying, wait a minute, I think I missed a page here. Yeah, I think I'm good here. But he's always trying to help others realize their dreams. Ron also created something called the Growing Concern Greenhouse in Connersville, Indiana. This was yet another time that Ron convinced me to move my family and come to work with him on another one of his wild ideas. The Growing Concern would be a working business, and it would be owned and operated by the people who were receiving services at what was then called the Fate Center, and I'm not kidding you, it was called the Fate Center, which is later known as Landmark in Connersville. People would grow plants and vegetables, stock the retail space, and staff the cash registers. And this was back in 1980, so this was pretty innovative stuff. The Growing Concern Greenhouse was on the road to success until funding changed, and the business never did turn a profit. But it was during those years in Connersville that I discovered my affinity for working with people who had disabilities, as Ron kept encouraging and pushing me to learn more. Ron had a commitment to the community and helping people with disabilities become active participants in the ordinary flow of community life long before anyone else I knew did. Hearing people like Lou Brown, Mark Gold, and Tom Powell would inspire Ron to come back and begin implementing the ideas he had learned. Ron's commitment to the community spanned housing, employment, and fun. Ron and I were working together in Anderson, Indiana, he as executive director and I as production manager for Hopewell Center. Ron had recently attended a conference at which the idea of a workshop without walls was being discussed. This was a precursor to supported employment. He came back all excited about how we would help people with the most significant disabilities become employed in the community, and as usual, wanted to enlist my help to make it happen. I, being of the sheltered employment mindset at the time, mea culpa, told Ron he was full of it and began to recite a litany of reasons why this was a bad idea and how it couldn't possibly happen. You know, unfortunately, we all still hear that same litany being uttered today by those who would defend segregated services and sheltered employment. Well, Ron was persistent, a hallmark of his being, and kept after me to change my thinking. He even sent me to Miami to attend a niche conference, presumably to learn how to get government contracts. Little did I know that his real reason for sending me was to hear a gentleman named Bob Persky talk about circles of friends and the power of community. Once I heard Bob Persky speak, I was forever changed and blew off the rest of the conference. I was feeling a little guilty about sitting around the pool and enjoying the Miami weather and an adult beverage or two instead of going to conference sessions. I worried what was going to happen when I came back to tell Ron that I couldn't do sheltered employment anymore or try to get niche contracts. So when I returned from Miami, I walked into Ron's office to give my report and break the bad news. He looked up from his desk, smiled, and said, "Good. I was hoping that would happen. Now we can get to work." Ron's journey took him to Washington County, Minnesota, just outside of St. Paul, where he was hired as executive director of a developmental learning center that was very interested in converting to supported employment. This was in 1986, when supported employment was still a fledgling idea. Ron knew that he needed help to make community-based employment a reality, so once again, he called and convinced me to move my family from Indiana to St. Paul. I vaguely remember him telling me how this was going to be a great adventure and how we would, and all the great things we would do in Minnesota, and how that we could do things that we had talked about here in Indiana but weren't able to do, and how we'd help so many people get into the community, and so how could I resist? Ron's vision and persistence changed the face of employment in Minnesota. He refused to take no for an answer, sometimes yes for an answer, but his ability to talk to people in government, families, and individuals who receive services helped to make those visions realities. We established one of the earliest supported employment programs in Minnesota, East Suburban Resources, where we worked one person at a time, regular wages and regular businesses. Ron cleared the way for the staff to do the work, and he hired me to teach them how. It was a great partnership, and the organization was succeeded on a fast track, perhaps too fast. ESR was one of the first day training programs in Minnesota to receive VR funding and was also awarded 2 grants by the Minnesota Supported Employment Project, which helped fuel the success that we had. Well, Ron's success at ESR and his rapidly growing national profile resulted in him leaving Minnesota in 1989 to succeed Dr. Tom Powell as the president of the Institute for Human Resource Development in Connecticut. IHRD was one of the preeminent training and consulting entities on supported employment in the nation. They were populated with some of the best thinkers and practitioners regarding the newly emerging skills and tools of supported employment. IHRD was one of the first groups to develop a series of employment specialist training and teach not just employment specialists, but also train others to train them. My friends and colleagues from IHRD developed many of the content areas that the APSE certification standards and materials and concepts are based on and still used today. Ron, however, realized that his greatest talents were best used running a rehabilitation organization. He knew that providing a traditional community rehabilitation program he knew that proving that a traditional community rehabilitation program could indeed convert to supported employment, and that was something he needed to accomplish. So Ron was hired as the president and CEO of the Lehigh Association of Rehabilitation Centers, LARC, in 1992. Ron systematically began the process of moving LARC toward a community-based future. He brought in and developed some of the best practitioners of supported and customized employment as trainers, consultants, and employees, including my friend and colleague Corey Smith from Pennsylvania. Ron guided LARC through good times and rough times, including a merger with the United Cerebral Palsy Association that resulted in the organization becoming known as VIA of the Lehigh Valley. He was responsible for the development of a multi-million-dollar foundation to support the activities of LARC, VIA, by raising money to help offset the cost of doing business in a new way, or the regularly occurring budget cuts that programs experience. He was an expert at strategic planning, financial management, and governance. He was an inspirational leader, very intelligent, although he didn't always spell so well, and a hard worker. He was also a very natty dresser. I mean, Ron introduced me to pink shirts and tasseled loafers. He was my fashion consultant and taught me the correct way to tie a tie, not to mention what ties went well with what outfits also. Alas, I always seemed to disappoint him when it came to that. But no matter where Ron went, he made a difference. Whether it was in the theater or in services for people with disabilities, Ron's passion, commitment, and knowledge always guided him. Ron was the executive director of the Jasper, Indiana Community Arts Commission and Indianapolis Civic Theater, both experiences that developed and honed his skill as a top executive. Ron served on many boards and commissions, often ascending to a leadership role. These included the Indiana Association of Rehabilitation Facilities, Minnesota Habilitation Coalition, the National Association of Rehabilitation Facilities, the Greater Lehigh Valley Chamber of Commerce and Foundation, the Allentown Symphony, and others. Ron also served on various state and national commissions and work groups. Ron had been a member of APSE since the beginning. He served on the board of APSE and as president, and also served on the board of the APSE Foundation. During my tenure as APSE president, the association was going through some rocky times. I had to rely on some key board members, Laura, Teresa Grassi, who were part of that group, to advise me on leading APSE and making some very difficult decisions. I remember driving back from Richmond, where APSE's offices were located. We were going back up to Pennsylvania to Ron's house. I was driving up with Ron, and it was a particularly challenging episode. And I was feeling pretty bad and not really talkative, an affliction Ron didn't have. I looked over at Ron, who was driving, and said something like, I really wish you didn't have to learn this stuff the hard way. And Ron seemed thinking for a minute, and if you knew Ron, he saw that little soul patch under his lip poking straight out. And he said, and he thought for a minute, he looked over at me, and he said, that's the only way you learn it. He was never afraid to take on the difficult tasks, no matter how unpopular they were. He was courageous, insightful, passionate, funny, and loyal. He was a wonderful father and husband, loving son, brother, and uncle. My oldest daughter, Gretchen, upon hearing upon his passing, said that Ron was the guy who taught her what it meant to be an adult. He was an avid runner, patron of the arts, art collector, gourmet cook. He was my mentor, co-conspirator, traveling companion, and the reason I do what I do today. Most importantly, though, he was my best friend, and I miss him every day. So it's with great honor that we present this award to Ron's family, his wife Ann, and his whole family is right down here, his brother and sister and their kids and some friends, and all the people who, on behalf of all the people that whose life Ron changed. So Ann.
All right. Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you. I couldn't have done a better job with that. That was great.